Okay, so first things first, Fatback.
Yes, sir.
How did that come about?
Oh, I had that since I was probably 16, 17 years old. I went to work at a friend's garage, and his. I've never told this story much, but she's deceased now, so I'll tell the story. Her name was Lisa, and we used to call her a few names because she was kind of an airhead. And
Okay, all right.
she initially done it to try to be mean and get me back, but it kind of stuck, and it was, I may have been a little older, but it was sometime in that area, and it just stuck, and it stuck, and it stuck, and it's just been there. I'm 54 now, and I've had it since I was 16 or 17 years old.
I'm just going to ask the question: is it something that, at least at first, bothered you?
No, I really never let stuff like that bother me. So, that was her intention, obviously, but it never really bothered me that much.
All right. So when I refer to you, is it okay to call you Fatback, or is it okay or would you prefer Michael or Mike?
It doesn't matter. My mom's got used to Fatback, but
so your mama calls you Fatback?
no, she won't call me. But she got used to it.
Yeah.
She doesn't necessarily approve of it.
Okay. All right.
But she's got used to it. But you call me, I'll tell you what I tell everybody. Whatever you're comfortable with.
Well, I'm not going to make Mama mad.
Yeah. So.
At all. So, well, how did you get started in racing?
So I went to school
at first.
I went to school in Nashville, Tennessee.
Where at?
Nashville Auto Diesel College.
Okay. All right.
And then I really didn't know a whole lot about cars in general. I was an 18-year-old kid out of school. Went up there and learned the basics behind cars. And me and my dad came home, and we built a demolition derby car for the fair. And we had so much fun with it.
At Nashville Fairground?
No, Cleveland County.
Okay, all right. Okay.
We had so much fun with it that we thought we would dip our feet into the dirt track racing. And I had some friends that had dirt track cars, and so we got out and about and found us a old used junker and went and got it. And as the story goes, it all started from there. Fortunately enough, I was better at building cars than I was at driving. And so as we started getting more involved and doing more and more, it got started getting expensive. And my dad he worked at the phone company. And we weren't poor, but we sure couldn't afford a fancy race car. So I started working on other people's cars to kind of subsidize my racing. And that's kind of how I learned. Every opportunity I got to learn, I'd go work at somebody's car. There's a guy named Scott Weaver that comes from a family in Shelby, North Carolina. They had some Daytona Dash cars. Started learning about asphalt by hanging out with those guys. A guy named Doug Man Davis, a famous and infamous race car driver, dirt mostly from around this area. Hang out at his shop some and learn fabrication skills. He did some tours with Gary Ballou back in the heydays of Gary Ballou. So even though it's all big and wide, it's all small, But sometime after I started racing, I took my first plane trip, and it's probably the most educational trip I ever took in my life. Is I flew to Kalamazoo, Michigan, and went to a chassis seminar at Randy Sweet's Sweet Manufacturing with Randy Sweet and Butch Miller.
Okay.
And this would have been in the late 80s.
Okay.
Middle, late 80s. And that was the most eye-opening educational experience of my young days. It just made me more knowledgeable about the workings of a front end and how it works. So then, after that, I just kept raced a little bit at Hickory with Robert Presley's dad, Bob, and some of that generation, Max Presswood, those guys. Then I started helping a guy locally with he wanted a sportsman car back when he used to run sportsmen at Charlotte. And he bought a car, and we all started working on it. Well, that's how I met Robert G.
Okay, yeah.
And I met Robert G. and Richard Broom
Okay.
about that same time. Being over at Robert G.'s house working on this car, because the guy who was doing the motors worked out the back of Robert G.'s shop.
Yeah.
So we worked on that car over there, and we got better and we got better, and I just met some people and got introduced to a few people, and then that's when I got the opportunity to go to work at Lake Speeds. That was my first job, and as a fabricator.
Okay.
And I was never really shy about. I was never scared to say I could do something. You know, you could say, can you hang that door? Just because I hadn't never hung one before, I'd probably say yes. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So I went to work
Yeah.
at Lakes, and the very first day I went to work there, I walked in, and the guy who was crew chief says, they were in the middle of a nose change for Ford, and he said, "Can you put that nose on that car?" And I said, "Sure." Never done it in my life, but that's when I learned. That day, I learned about templates,
Yeah.
and all that stuff, and I put that nose on and straightened it up, lined it up, and then next thing you know, I'm hanging tails, and next thing I know, I'm doing whatever. And so I stayed there for about a year. We never really solidified any major sponsorship.
Now, were you full time at that point, or
That was my first full-time job.
when was that?
90 or 91.
Okay. All right.
You know how that is. It's
Oh
hard
yeah.
to,
Yeah.
It's hard to remember. And then, and like I said, this whole time I'm working at Robert G's at night, trying to learn more, trying to get better at the craft. And we won one of those sportsman races during this time.
Yeah.
So.
Now you talking about late model? Well, it wasn't late model sportsman by the.
Okay, so
early
back
90s.
then they ran them on Wednesday nights.
Okay, so you're talking about the sportsman that Humpy started at
Yeah.
Charlotte. Okay,
That's right.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, and so not Bush.
Right.
I can't even call it Bush anymore. We don't even know what it is.
Yeah.
Not Grand National
Right.
Sportsman.
Correct. Yeah.
But the true sportsman that
Okay.
Humpy started, which was a bunch of old Monte Carlos and
Right.
stuff like that. But anyway, so at that time, I'm giving a whole history lesson during my career here. But at that time,
That's why we're here.
Harry Melling and Bill Elliott, Motorsports or whatever it was called back then, decided to part ways. This is we were Lake still wasn't running all the full-time races, and so we all started looking for jobs. We were just barely hanging on, and so they packed everything up in Dawsonville and put it in tractor trailers and moved it to Charlotte. First thing they did was rented a shop from Butch Mott and Barbara Healy, and Harry Hyde was running this thing for Harry Mellon. And Robbie McLeod. So I'm giving a lot of plugs to my guys.
Yeah.
Robbie McLeod, I had met him through what's his name? Seat guy anyway. I can't believe I'm drawing a blank on it. Butler.
Yeah.
Brian Butler.
Yeah.
And Robbie said, well, Harry's going to start this deal back up, and he needs people. And I said, okay, well, I got like me and a jackman and a tire changer, and we're looking for jobs anyway. So 3 of us went over there and went to work for Harry. So then that's the day I met Harry Hyde. So the moral of all that is I've been fortunate throughout my whole racing career to spend time with some of the greats, some of the great fabricators, some of the great crew chiefs. So then I got to spend a year with Harry Hyde. Peter Suspenzo was over there then, and some great mechanics. I mean, I can't name them all. So what I try to always do, and I tell my children this, is every step I took, I tried to pick up something.
Yeah.
I try to listen to everybody. I may not like it or agree with it, but if there's one thing out of what everybody said, then it made me a better mechanic, crew chief. I wasn't a crew chief at the time, but At the time, I was a car chief. So from Harry, I started learning even some more details about front ends and geometries and the way things work and what changed what. And, I just kept getting smarter and smarter and smarter. Well, Harry, see if I can get my history right. Harry got it up and going, and he was good. He wanted to go back to retire. And so Lake and them were coming in, so we parted. We went a different direction. That's when I went
parted with Lake.
Melling.
You parted with Melling, okay.
Yeah. Well, I needed to move up.
Right.
And I couldn't do it there because of the way Blake brought some of his people from his place over there, and it just wasn't going to be a spot for me to continue to climb.
Yeah.
And I wasn't satisfied I've never been a plateau guy, so
yeah.
I had to keep climbing. So Kevin Hamlin, we had become friends from the garage area or whatever. He says he needed somebody to run his fab shop. So I went to work at Richard Jackson Motorsports, Skoll, with Kevin Hamlin. And my job was to build cars. I didn't go to track at the time, but I was building cars. But at the times when Skoll and all that was starting to go away because of all the regulations
right.
and all that stuff. So the second year we had Hooters, but we only had it for a year. And then at the end of the year, that thing kind of disintegrated, for lack of a better term.
Yeah. Rick
went to Ray Mock. Kevin went to Richard Childers.
Yeah.
A bunch of the guys went with Kevin to Richard Childers. And the ones that were just scared to death, everything just disappeared. And there wasn't many of us left. Go ahead.
I want to go back and ask you about some of these legends that you've worked with, because over the course of doing this podcast, we have heard the name Robert G. over and over and over again with the influence that he had on so many different people. Tell me about working with Robert G. What's your best Robert G. story that would describe to people who he was and what it was like to work with him?
So, I'm trying to think how to describe him. Robert G. So I don't know if you've ever picked an orange from a tree.
Yeah.
Not from the grocery store.
Right.
But an orange from a tree. They're not pretty. They're rough. They got tough skin on them. They're hard to get into. Most of the time the skin's 1/4 inch thick. But when you get inside of them, they're nice, they're good, they're sweet, they're great, right? And Robert G. was that way. Robert G. was hard. So if you walked up to his shop and we were all working, he may not even speak to you.
Yeah.
But once he trusted you, there was no end to what he would teach you, give you, or help you with. He was the most genuine, at that time, the most genuine person I had ever met in that industry, because he literally was passing it on. And I didn't get it at the time, even though I was a sponge. I was different than other people. I was a sponge, man. I spent as much time as I could with him, always. He's a great guy. I named his dog after me. I can't really tell you on here why, but
what was the dog's name?
Fatback.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, man, you can't open the door like that and not expect me to.
He said all he wanted to do is eat and shit. I'm sure you got to beep that out of it. Or eating crap, however you want to say it. So,
okay, all right.
So anyway, one of the greatest people I ever worked with. Great dude. And at the time, I was just learning the genealogy, for lack of a better term, around Robert G.
Yeah.
And a lot of it didn't make sense to me until after I had moved on and Robert had died, and then I started understanding who all was related to him,
yeah,
and who all had influence from him, and all the people he had touched through that industry, which I named one a while ago with Richard Broom. You know, they had a deep, heavy relationship. You know, and Richard's daughter Angie, you know, she died from cancer at a really young age, but she was there, and actually she was engaged to the guy who was building the motors. I mean, it was just it just kept touching each other, you know, and then Earnhardt and his daughter, and Stiffy and his dad, you know, it just, everywhere you touched, Robert G had his hands on somebody, you know, Jeff Bodine. I mean, it just keeps going on and on and on. But he was what he did was the way really everything should be, is he passed it on. You know what I mean? And he didn't get nothing for it. I mean, he got friendship and loyalty and stuff like that, but he was a passer on, you know. And there's a lot of races won after he quit racing that he had a part in.
The next guy that you mentioned that we've heard a lot about from a lot of different people was Harry Hyde.
Yeah.
What was it like to work with him?
So me and Harry have the same birthday.
No kidding. Wow.
Yeah. And a few years apart, but
yeah.
He was similar. He was very close-minded to what he knew, and he respected me because I wouldn't. He would tell me to do something, and I would explain to him why I thought it was wrong, and he respected me for that. And so he started teaching me more and more and more, and we started doing things together. And he had some things he wanted to do, like on the front end. He would change the angles of the A-frames and stuff. And he had these little I had to make these little bolts for him and stuff like that. This is some of the first slugs. People that work on race cars know what I'm talking about, but they weren't slugs back then, so we'd take bolts and cut them in half and make them be a slug, tack weld them in. But I showed him how I could make a slug, and then we started developing things. So once he trusts me, he gave me everything that I needed to know. And we were part-time back then, you know, the first season or whatever. And so when you're part-time, you spend a lot of time together because you drive to a lot of races, and that was during the Indy, some of that inaugural testing. And we drove up there and we raced it. We raced at Michigan and went to Harry Mellon's place and hung out and went to his golf course and played golf. And, you know, we had some really good times back then because we were racing part-time, you know. But they're the legends of our sport, you know. And there's a lot of people in the Hall of Fame. Everybody's got different ideas of what the Hall of Fame should be. But there's a lot of people in the Hall of Fame that should be there, and opinions are like assholes. Everybody's got one. But there's a lot of people in that Hall of Fame that shouldn't be there. But there's some guys that need to be in there, man, that really built. Ask Rick Hendrick what Robert G did for him.
Yeah.
Ask Rick Hendrick what Harry Hyde did for him. You know, there's a lot of people that need to be in that Hall of Fame that ain't there and probably won't ever be there, but they deserve to be there.
So you wind up over at Richard Jackson's, and that's when Rick Mast is there. And heaven forbid I do a podcast that mentions Rick Mast and not ask about a good Rick Mast story. What's your best Rick Mast story? And don't hold anything back.
Well, I mean, I got tons of them, but when so in the beginning, we didn't see him a whole lot because he was in Virginia and we were in Denver.
Yeah.
And I was in the shop, and I didn't go to the racetrack for the first year, really. Okay. And I was still young, and I wasn't involved with anything other than building cars. But I remember the first time I went to the Bristol race, and he was there, and it's the funniest thing ever. So Skull was our sponsor, but he did dip Skull back in. I don't know if he still does now or not, but and we were racing, but I don't remember what happened. But we went quite a few laps down. So then we were points racing, right? So you're just riding around, staying out of everybody's way, which at Bristol is a job on its own.
Yeah.
But once we started points racing, then he would come in on a pit stop and get a can of snuff and get him a dip, and he'd just relax in from that on.
Oh dear.
And so the first time I ever saw it, I said, "Did y'all just give him a can of snuff?" And they were like, "Oh yeah, he's done now, so he's just chilling out." So he would dip during the race.
Yeah.
But Rick's a great guy. I was fortunate enough to go to one of his fundraisers he used to have up at Rockbridge Bass, and see the real guy. He's a community person and a family guy. He's got a great family, and his kids have done well for themselves. He's just Rick.
So you're working your way up the ladder. You start out at Lakes, you go over to Melling, you go to Richard Jackson. At what point did becoming a crew chief become a goal of yours? Was that a goal that you started out with, or did that develop over time?
It was never a goal.
Okay.
It was a necessity.
Okay.
So I ended with Kevin went to Richard Childers, Rick went to Butch Mox. Most of the guys went with one of them too. And there was about 6 of us left, with the promise that if we got a sponsor, then I'll start paying you full time again. So we were just barely getting enough money. My wife can tell you, I wasn't getting enough money to pay bills. So for about 2 or 3 months there through December, well actually November, December, January, no sponsor, very little money coming in. Richard gave me a welder in December and said he didn't have no money, but he gave me a welder and so I could help pay my bills.
Wow.
But what happened was I was the only guy that knew how to set up a car. So Richard says, "You're going to be the crew chief." Okay.
Okay, cool.
So I knew how to build shocks. I didn't really know. When I say I knew how to build them, somebody had to give me the valving, and I could assemble them, and I could dyno them. And I was the only guy that knew how to do that. So I'm trying to think of the name of that sponsor. I don't know. It had a star on it. Well, I won't say it was AC Delco, but it had a star on it.
Right.
But Morgan came over there to drive, and Morgan was like us at the time. He didn't have a job, and he needed a break. And so Richard promised him, he'd give him part of the winnings or whatever. And we went to Daytona. And I would call 2 people every Monday. I smile because it meant a lot, and they didn't have to do it, but they did. I called 2 people on Mondays. I'd call Chris Hill at Penske Shocks at the time, and I'd call Robbie Loomis at Rich Petty's.
Wow.
And give me a starting spot.
Wow.
And they would.
No kidding. Wow.
But that's the way it was back then, man.
Yeah.
Nobody wants to see anybody fail. Nobody wants to see Richard lose his race team and go out of business. And give me a starting spot. I've never been to Daytona. I've been to Daytona, but I never set a car up for daggum Daytona 500. So they give me a starting spot. Well, they give me a starting spot before we go test. And back then we would test like 3 or 4 times. You test Daytona, you test Talladega, you go back to Daytona to test, and you might go to Talladega on the way to Daytona to test air boxes and air cleaners and stuff like that. So they gave me some guidance, and we had some of the old notes. And so we always had somewhere to get going from. So went to Daytona and done all the tests and everything. We had one car that Morgan really loved, and then our backup car he despised it. And as far as we knew, they were identical, but you know how that is. There was no laser measuring devices back then. So this is a cool story. Not many people's ever heard this story. So we went down there and we qualified. We qualified decent. I don't remember where we qualified at. But in the twin 125 on Thursday back then. Yeah. We got in a wreck late in the race. Messed the nose up, busted the radiator. So we, get the backup car off, guys. And back then, the way Daytona was laid out, there was that big old concrete padded area over behind where everybody would go and work on their cars when they had to do major work. And all that's gone now. But so I pulled it over there, and we had the other car over there that we just wrecked, and one car was a front steer car, one car was a rear steer car. Now that I'm telling the story, and he said, "I hate that car. We won't be able to stay on the lead lap on that car. It's over and over and over." And if you know Morgan, once he gets on something, it ain't going away.
Yeah.
And over and over and over. And so I had the two cars sitting there facing both side by side. And I said, "I'm going to tell you what we're going to do." And he said, "What?" I said, "I'm cutting that body off and putting it on that car." This was on Thursday. And he was like, "You think you can do that?" I said, "No, I know I can do it." And so I cut the body off.
Cut the body off the backup?
Cut the body off the backup.
Okay.
From the windshield forward. Cut it at the cowl, because the cowl was tore up and everything. Hood was tore up. Cut it at the cowl, through the wheel well. Cut all the mounts off at the frame, all the way around. Set the whole thing off as a piece. Radiator, everything. Cut everything off the primary car, and took that piece and put it on there. And fixed it, and we made practice Friday.
Wow.
And the only thing you could see was there was a white tape stripe where we cut it. And I don't remember where we finished. We actually finished pretty good. We could go back and look, but we finished, man. And it blew everybody away, So then, back then.
So how long did you work Thursday in order to
all night? Well, we worked all the way to dark. You know how back then they'd let you work.
Yeah.
But it seems like it's more complicated than it is, because we took the whole unit and took it over here and put it on that car.
Yeah.
And see, luckily enough, back then, the guy doing our bodies was a guy named Chip Lane. And Chip was really good about being consistent on his stuff. And so it really wasn't that hard to interchange. And they weren't that strict back then on templates and everything. So as long as that overall template fit, they didn't give a crap, especially by that time of the weekend, because everybody had some kind of damage, or they'd beat on their car, or whatever. And so we just made it happen, man. We did a lot of that back then, though. You remember, we did a lot of make it happen back then. Nobody wasn't paid by the hour; they were paid by the week, and everybody was there to race. They wasn't trying to screw the system or screw somebody out of money or backstab nobody. Everybody was there doing the same thing, man. We were there racing, trying to win, trying to beat our buddy. And so it's different than it is now. Yeah. It's just different. But we had a good Daytona. But that was my first crew chief experience. And then, wasn't Atlanta second back in, or was Rockingham second?
I think Rockingham was second.
We had a decent run at Rockingham.
Yeah, well, you finished 10th at Rockingham.
Okay, but then we went to Atlanta.
And then you went to Atlanta.
And Atlanta put me on the map.
Yeah.
Because everybody's like, who is this kid?
Yeah.
So we went to Atlanta, and Morgan always ran good at Atlanta. And this is before they changed the track. And we had a good weekend, man. We had a decent qualifying, and then we either finished second or third. Third. It was my first. This is a good story right here for you. You ready? It's a podcast story right here. So this is the first time I ever met Todd Parrott, who ended up being my teammate at Yates. So we pitted, and we took 2 tires. Put a little extra air in the right front. Where'd he finish? Do you know?
Dale Jarrett won.
He won.
And Ernie Irvin finished second.
Second. Okay. So he came out with 4 tires. We came out with 2. And I don't know where we came out. I don't remember. I just know that we came out in front of him. And he walked his butt down to my pit and said, there's 4 tires behind you. You need to move over. And my answer to Todd was, you got to catch that sumbitch first. And I'd never met him in my life. And he was Todd Parrott, you know. I mean, at the time, he was, you know, he had already been up and coming. Yeah. He had already been going. Yeah. And I said, you got to catch that sumbitch first. And we had a good race. They raced hard. And we finished third. And I got phone calls that Monday from people like Robert Yates, Doug Yates, and other people in the industry congratulating us because they knew what we had overcome.
All right, yeah.
You know, no guys, just barely enough for a pit crew. Everybody takes their ass to the racetrack because that's all we got. And we weren't going to win a pit stop off pit road because we didn't have a pit crew. I mean, we had a throw together pit crew, but not.
Right. Yeah.
We held our own, man. You know, and we had a pretty good. I was really surprised looking back how come we couldn't really get a sponsor because we had a good deal. It's just like we didn't have the right person working on it. You know what I mean? Because we were showing improvement and we were running in the top 5s and we started going. And then I think Morgan left first and went to
the
77 car.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think he left first.
Yeah.
Because I stayed for a little while with Nadeau before I followed him.
Now, were you a package deal?
No.
Did he go over there and say
he went over there and raced?
Okay, all right.
And they didn't never get going real good.
Okay.
And I stayed there with Nadeau for a little while through what was that trucking company we had? Anyway,
was it R&L?
Yes.
Yeah.
Through the R&L first little bit or whatever. But it was never really enough money to race. It was just enough money to barely pay the bills. You know what I'm saying?
Enough money to put the decal on the car.
We were 3 or 4 deep in a hotel room, and Richard had to pay the tire bill when we got there every week, and you know, that kind of deal.
Right.
But we held on as long as we could, and Morgan called one day and said, "We can't get going over here. Will you come help?" And I wasn't really getting paid, so anything they paid me was probably going to be about double what I was making. Right. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I told my wife, and she's like, "Look, I know you love all them guys over there, but they're going to pay you every week." I said, "Yeah, you're right."
Yeah,
so
yeah.
That was the next step.
So you stayed at the 77th car through most of 1998, but then you moved over to Kel Yarborough's deal late in the season. How did that come about?
I had a difference of opinion with one of the owners. How's that?
At the Jasper car.
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
We had a rough season.
Right.
And actually, he was the probably the main owner at Jasper at the time. He didn't work day-to-day operations at the race shop. He was day-to-day operations at the motor shop.
Right.
And you know, he was he was a fairly arrogant person, and he was from a different part of the country than I'm from. But we had worked hard, and the same old deal. We had a pretty thin crew, and we'd worked really hard. And it was during the Charlotte Race Week that we. I can't remember the schedule. Back then, there was always a day that everybody took off.
I think it was Friday, wasn't it?
Might have been. It was Thursday or Friday. I don't remember. So we had worked hard, and we had a tough part of the few weeks, and some tough things going on at short tracks and stuff like that. And I said, when practice was over that day, whatever day it was, I said, boys, we're taking the day off tomorrow. Everybody's wore out. I'm wore out. My brain's fried. We ain't had a day off, and I don't know when. We're taking tomorrow off. And so we took tomorrow off. Well, we were all relaxing, having a good time, hanging out with our friends. And he called me. Want to know what the heck I was doing. And I told him, we're wore out. We're taking a day off. So this went on and on and on. So when we went back to work that following Monday, he didn't think I made the right decision. And I told him I didn't really care. My guys were wore out. They'd worked their guts out.
Yeah.
And they earned a day off. And, whatever. I didn't care. But that brought a good story now to go with that. Got nothing to do with racing. So I had met, when was that? It was 98? Late 98?
Yeah.
Okay. So I had met a guy at Richard Jackson's from Chicago. Right? So I was a huge Bulls fan. Still am. So he calls, and I tell you when it was. It was right. It was either right before or right after Michigan is when I parted ways with that crew. But he says, "Hey man, I got season passes. It's Game 6 for the NBA Finals. You want to go?"
Holy cow, man!
And I was like, "Yeah." So I got an airplane, flew by myself. Got an airplane, flew to Chicago, got me a hotel outside of town. I don't know if you've ever been to Chicago to visit.
Yeah.
But you can catch a public transit and go right back uptown. So I stayed outside of town, took public transit right back uptown, went to United Center. We sat in the end they finished in, played the Jazz. The end they finished in, about 15 rows up, right?
Wow.
And I went in, sat in my seat, watched the whole half, got up, went to the bathroom, came back, sat in my seat, watched the whole half. I never wanted to miss 1 second of that. So I would have never met that guy. God, what's his name? He's a crazy dude. If he hears this, he'll remember me.
Yeah.
But if I hadn't have lost my job, I'd have never got to experience that. So I called it a blessing that I lost my job. But yeah, I went to Kell Yarbrough's after that.
I don't know how exactly.
Had a lot of steps, I know.
Yeah. I don't know how exactly to ask this question. But when the team owner called you and fussed about you guys taking the day off, you said you didn't care.
Yeah.
You stood up for what you believed in.
Yep.
You don't seem to sugarcoat a lot.
I'd probably still be in the industry. So I always told everybody that my biggest asset was also, I don't know the word I'm looking for here, Rick. My biggest asset was also my biggest problem or my biggest issue.
I understand.
Or I'm a fighter. I'll do everything I can to win. If I'm on your side, I'll bleed with you. If you're against me, I'll do anything I can to stop you. And throughout my life and throughout my career, anytime I saw someone who was against me or against what we were trying to accomplish or against the people that were stood behind me, then I had a problem with it. And sometimes it hurt me.
Yeah.
Hindsight 2020, I'm 54 now. I was in my 30s then, in my late 20s. If I knew what I knew now, I probably would have done a few things differently. I probably wouldn't have done that any differently because we were spinning our wheels and we weren't going anywhere. We were nearing the end of the rope anyway because Robert didn't stay there much longer after that, if I remember right. Because they just, that's just kind of how they did. They'd go with somebody for 6 or 8 months and it wouldn't work out and they'd go with somebody else. And that's why they never really got anywhere.
Right.
It's because they never would build any roots with any crew members, or drivers, And so they never really had that good of a season.